Story 1. Russia 2.0 is a kleptocracy where nobody cares about politics anymore. Everyone suffers from mental illness due to poverty and societal decline. Everyone knows they live in a dictatorship, but nobody does anything about it because there is little they can do. However, artificial intelligence-generated adult content will be extraordinary, allowing people to escape into their dark apartments and mentally deteriorate one day at a time. Story 2. Presuming that the current descent into authoritarianism ends the way most authoritarian regimes do, there will be either the death of the regime head, followed by infighting among the heirs apparent, which will likely erupt into a civil war, after which the victorious side will purge the portion of the population that supported the losing side. The United States becomes a third-world hellhole reviled by the world at large. Unfortunately, there is no precedent for this path with a world power possessing nuclear weapons. Violent resistance by the population, guerrilla warfare, responded to with overwhelming brutality by the regime, but eventually, after a long civil war, the regime will be overthrown, and a new democracy will arise with numerous checks and balances built into the new system, specifically designed to prevent the same kind of regime from rising again. This includes ranked choice voting, no national political parties, numerous independent anti-corruption task forces, substantial bureaucracy, but overall a system more difficult for tyrants to gain power. Internal collapse, fracture of the nation into numerous regional powers, similar to the Soviet Union circa 1991, likely resulting in one large inheritor state still aligned with the regime mindset, which eventually pursues an imperial policy trying to regain its former power. Story 3. America as a dominant power is over. No one will trust us as an ally or partner again. With us shutting down scientific research, we are no longer the hub for innovation. It is going to get a lot worse and never get better. Story 4. I personally think there is a good chance the United States will experience a second civil war within the next 40 to 50 years. The political division we are seeing now is a symptom of the problem, not the problem itself. The real problem is the dissolution of a coherent American identity. We are struggling over the fundamental question: what does America stand for? The primary reason why this ideological rift has become more problematic is what is missing, and that is a realistic existential threat. I do not see anything in the immediate future that will heal this growing ideological divide. If you ask the average American, they would say the United States is a global force for peace. I am saying this as an American, but that is about as far from the truth as you can get. The United States has engaged in a major war roughly every 20 years going all the way back to its foundation. There are only a few instances where the United States was not the aggressor, but at several key points during our history, what ultimately united Americans was an internal or external existential threat. With the advent of nuclear weapons, assuming some new technology does not eliminate the threat of nuclear weapons, there is no realistic external existential threat. The political division we are seeing is either a fight over issues that represent an existential threat to one's beliefs regarding the United States identity or issues people have moved on to arguing about in the absence of an existential threat. I think trust in the truthfulness of our government, particularly since the close of the Vietnam War, is another factor preventing Americans from rallying around a singular coherent identity. In short, I think it is a real ideological divide that is driving political division, and not the other way around. Story 5. Honestly, the future will be similar to now but a bit more dystopian. The rich will continue to get richer, companies will keep buying up competition and consolidating. The middle class will continue to shrink, leaving more of the haves and have-nots. Think cyberpunk-type life. Donald Trump has already done irreparable damage to the United States through many actions, but the biggest long-term impact will be proving that the Constitution can be ignored, at least temporarily, with little to no consequences. This will lead to more government corruption and less accountability. Again, very cyberpunk. We will probably still be at war but with fewer allies than before, unless something big happens, such as the president moving nuclear submarines closer to Russia to distract from being involved in controversial files. I think society will be much more liberal than it is now, as seen from massive protests against King's polling data and Generation Z becoming the older generation. Issues like LGBTQ rights will be widely accepted, and social concerns will shift toward Android and artificial intelligence rights. A lot can happen in 50 years. Story 6. It will look like Megacity 1 from Dread, except with a much more powerful police state and even less freedom. Story 7. 3 countries, maybe 4. The West will be the most populated and successful. The North and Northeast will be roughly the same. The desert states will be unlivable. The South will be poor, very religious, and uneducated. Story 8. There will not be a 50 years from now. We have missed every opportunity to address climate change, and we are speeding toward a wall. Story 9. It is hard to say when we keep moving back and forth from one political extreme to the other. Congress spends all its time on hearings related to one party going after the other, instead of actually trying to solve problems. When one side wins, the other side does nothing but try to interfere with the agenda that got them elected instead of trying to find compromises. It is not looking good unless we can get a serious third party involved to push a more moderate agenda. Story 10. I have 2 takes. Optimistic. 2028 is somewhat akin to 2008, or hopefully 1932, in the rejection of the current administration. There is enough legislative power to push many fixes through, including protecting the civil service, removing the president's tariff abilities, and generally restoring rights. The administration will be judged on the economy but will also work diligently on other issues. Things are somewhat righted as a result. Major fixes are also needed to keep Social Security and other programs viable, which probably means taxes are raised. Pessimistic. The United States basically enters years of stagflation and an impending labor crisis. This compounds with the debt crisis, and suddenly the United States is struggling to keep the lights on. Story 11. Artificial intelligence scientists say that in only 10 years, artificial general intelligence will wipe us out entirely as a species. If we are still around in 2075, the political climate will either be a hellscape controlled by humans or by an all-knowing computer brain that sees humans as obstacles in the way of its goals. Story 12. In all likelihood, racial mixing will continue, and the United States, or the countries it splits into, will have a population in varying shades of brown. Sorry, white supremacists, but you cannot stay pure forever. Story 13. The United States is a country of extremes. If I had to guess, the population will likely double, driven by immigration. There is a small but significant chance that a third political party could bring politics closer to the center than it is currently. New technology will drive business and productivity to new heights, and new protection mechanisms will need to be in place to support the middle and lower classes. This is just a guess. Story 14. Look up House Resolution 1319. It will probably become law or something very similar within the next 1 to 2 years. It would essentially eliminate most of the limited workers' rights currently in place. The net result is that people will become independent contractors without protections under Equal Employment Opportunity Laws or the Family and Medical Leave Act, and without employer-paid health insurance. In other words, the extremely wealthy will become significantly wealthier in ways we cannot yet comprehend, while the rest of the country will begin to resemble the current conditions in West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. That is the future of the United States. I am glad I moved away. Story 15. Once the baby boomers are gone, it will be a totally different situation. They are just an interesting generation. Story 16. There are 2 paths ahead of us. One is a massive shift left within the Democratic Party, leading to a unified resistance that manages to topple the current regime in the 2028 election and begins to radically transform this country for the better. It is currently unclear whether we will even have a real 2028 election, and the shift leftward is, at best, just barely getting started, so I do not have high hopes. The other path is a deeply dystopian future on par with a modern-day, what if the Nazis won World War II scenario. I cannot stress this enough. There is no third option. Anything short of the former scenario will, at best, delay the latter path by 1 election cycle. Story 17. Considering my optimistic stance, how many victories we get, quite a few over the American Council of Organizations, the fact so much power is centralized around a cult identity, and the growing sentiment on the left to clean up the old chaff and put in new socialist leadership. I think we are going to see America fracture. We cannot exist in a society where a third of us want women to be household furniture, half of us do not care about anything, and half of us believe a person has a right to choose whether a fetus lives or dies. This will continue as a fight over identity and belief that will eventually lead the logical socialists to say, "Forget the tornado states. Let them fall apart without us if they do not accept the help." California, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, and the other states to the west that mostly trend Democratic or purple are well equipped to separate. The militaries are largely Democratic, and money flows through California in such a way that I am surprised my state is taking so long to realize it could easily leave and be its own dominant power. Likewise, the eastern states are really secure, make good money, and can sustain themselves, especially as they move toward socialism. The religious conservatives are in for a rough awakening once the socialists pull away. Faith and bigotry do not fill bellies, and while they may make some money on oil for a while, the continued push toward alternative energy sources will mean they will not be able to support themselves at some point. The corporations will not want to stay in those states anyway, centralizing conservative power around Texas and Florida. Those groups may try to be imperialist, but the threat of nuclear arms in the socialist nations will make it a moot point. The cult will collapse inward, and eventually the Midwest states will limp toward California and New York, tail between their legs, as the people with an ounce of logic recognize many people around them are suffering due to the sunk cost fallacy. Overall, things will improve significantly. Story 18. 50 years is a long time. A lot can happen. However, I expect the rest of the world will probably further weaken its ties to the United States, forcing the United States to become more isolated to a point where it will need support from other countries to survive. Story 19. It depends on how optimistic or pessimistic you want to be and how we collectively choose as a society. Nobody can predict the future, but in some ways, things may have to get completely messed up before we decide as a nation that nobody wants to live like this anymore. It is exhausting and stressful. Most people just want safety, affordability, and a few extra dollars once the necessities are paid for to enjoy life. They want decent opportunities for their children. I choose to believe that most people do not want to fight with or resent their neighbors. Everything since 2020 has felt profoundly off. I think that COVID-19 and the resultant political bickering and division have affected us more than most are willing to admit. I think maybe all this has to be torn down, and it sure seems like our governmental structure is well on its way to being torn apart before we can build something better. If we can do that by simply caring about people beyond just our own immediate families, including people we may not understand regarding their religion, culture, sexuality, gender identity, national origin, or opinions on various matters, we can not only survive but thrive. It definitely will not look the same, but it could be better. I have to believe this in order to maintain my sanity. Story 20. A lot depends on how the rest of this presidential term unfolds and if another election happens in 2028. Story 21. If what is happening now cannot be stopped, there will not be a United States in 50 years. The best case scenario would be a collapse. The worst case, a civil war. By 2050, climate destabilization will be intensifying. That will also be around the time major aquifers used for farming run dry. That alone will cause serious problems, but the rise of far-right anti-intellectualism means that nothing will be done to mitigate it. In fact, actions will be taken to make it considerably worse. This far-right authoritarianism is destroying science and education, further hampering our ability to respond intelligently to the destabilizing climate. This includes not only extreme weather and the depletion of water resources, but also the spread of invasive species and diseases. By then, if the current ignorant individuals get their way, the nation will be comprised of unvaccinated, underfed, and overworked populations vulnerable to disease outbreaks. The first tropical disease to reach our shores would have a severe impact. This assumes those same individuals address the country's financial situation, which they clearly will not. The only reason we can sustain such a high debt load is because of our economy. If that is damaged, and efforts will likely be made, we will not be able to pay the interest on our debt. One silver lining is that there will be fewer people affected. With far-right racism combined with efforts to take every last cent from everyone who is not wealthy, the country will be moving toward depopulation. Immigration currently mitigates this, but depopulation may begin as soon as next year. Therefore, either the country will break up before it collapses, or it will collapse and then break up. Unless supporters of Make America Great Again finally reject their harmful ideology, which seems unlikely given current trends, I do not see a way for the country to survive. Even if Republicans manage a complete authoritarian takeover, the Fourth Reich will not last long due to ineptitude, corruption, and foolishness. Story 22. Far fewer people of color. Far fewer parks and recreation. Many topics we simply do not discuss. An expanded Bible Belt. A significant increase in people pretending to be someone they are not in public. Story 23. I do not think the country will hold together for another 50 years like this. Too many people want too many different things, and the United States is not built to handle them. The big issue is when the national credit limit is reached in 5 to 10 years. We will not be able to borrow, and the result will be severe cuts to federal programs. This will force the larger states to pay vast sums of money with no benefits, while states that are generally receivers will find their resources dry, causing widespread unrest. At that point, I see the country splintering due to our own actions, leading to a great dissolution of the United States. Story 24. I think the country will remain a global superpower. It has deep cultural, economic, and military ties with much of the world, along with a robust economic system, and is the only industrialized nation to have favorable population demographics by the end of the century. Meanwhile, China is on the verge of population collapse and has a massive real estate bubble. Russia has a declining population and an aging military. With its two main rivals struggling, I think the United States will be the sole global hegemon for the foreseeable future. By the 2070s, other powers like the European Union and India may seek to dethrone it. By this time, the United States will be much more diverse. Most Americans will be non-Hispanic white. America will likely have had its first Latino president by this point. It is also likely that a woman will have entered the Oval Office by then. Political trends are hard to predict. I think by this point, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights will be a settled issue, with near-unanimous support for gay marriage and no real qualms with people changing genders. It is possible that reforms like term limits for Congress or ranked choice voting will have been implemented, depending on how strong the movements for those are. I do think there will be a stock trading ban by this point. World War II will no longer be in living memory, with the last veterans of the conflict having died out in the 2040s. Baby boomers will be dying out, although at a slower rate than previous generations thanks to medical advances. Millennials will be retired, and Generation Z and Generation Alpha will be serving in the halls of government. Oil and gas will no longer be the nation's main sources of energy production. Solar, wind, and nuclear power will have taken their place. The world is also likely seeing the early stages of nuclear fusion commercialization, meaning by the end of the century fossil fuels will have gone the way of the plants that formed them. Artificial intelligence will transform the nation's economy. Many blue-collar jobs will be automated, all cars on the road will be self-driving, and home automation will be all the rage, giving Americans of this century the science fiction dreams of their compatriots in the last. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration will have established several moon bases by this time, and the military will have invested significant assets into Earth orbit. An American will have landed on Mars by this point, maybe in 2035, but more likely around 2050. All in all, America will have dealt with many changes by the 2070s, many of which will be for the better, perhaps serving as a testament that the country should have stayed optimistic in the 2020s despite its troubles. Story 25. By then, war will have swept through the country. It will start with World War III, and while that is happening, another civil war will rise up and decimate the nation. Regardless of which side wins, half the country will be in power and the other will be in poverty. It will not send us back to the Stone Age, but will feel more like the Wild West as far as the law is concerned. Story 26. I do not know, but someone is going to create artificial intelligence-generated adult content of PewDiePie and get him cancelled, only for everyone to find out it is fake, undermining cancel culture along with it. Story 27. De-dollarization accelerates. Far-right nationalism declines in the post-Trump era unless a new figure rises in the Make America Great Again movement to create fervor. The top 10% will continue to hoard more of the nation's wealth, even though the gross domestic product will look large. Wealth inequality and a competitive job market will create unhappiness. With de-dollarization and the national debt on the verge of imploding the financial system, the most dynamic and driven group will rise to overturn the system. I believe they will be a religious Christian group, albeit diverse in terms of race and sect. This is because religion unites and motivates people to act. It can serve as a unifying force for the growing Latin American population and the white population, who will be majority-minority in the future and forced to accept Americans of other races to achieve common goals. The new revolutionary system will be a socialist theocracy. Efforts will be made to improve healthcare and raise wages, but America will become more Christian and favor the Christian population, who will have privilege in employment and political power over other religious groups. Story 28. Unless we unite against a mutually hated external threat, we will become increasingly divisive with each passing year. The country does not function well without the British Empire, the Nazis, the Soviet Union, or terrorists providing a common enemy to stand against. When asked to find something to unite for, we remember why we fought the divisive civil war against one another. Story 29. Probably similar to how it was 50 years ago until today. It might not have the same economic power, but I guess the United States will still be a top 3 economy in the world. There will probably be a decrease in immigration in the short term, as the 2000s and 2010s had the highest immigration levels ever. The 2020s to 2040s will likely have more limited immigration as the pendulum swings back. After Donald Trump, there will likely be more checks and balances put into place, similar to how many emergency powers were reduced after Presidents Johnson and Nixon. We think of there being major racial issues in this country, and they definitely exist, but it is nothing in comparison to the late 1960s and 1970s. The major issue will be the transfer of power. Will Donald Trump step away or cause a constitutional crisis in 2028 or 2029? I do not know the answer, but my guess is it would be closer to 2020, where he might insinuate corruption, rile his supporters up, but not have any nationwide insurrection. Story 30. Most notably, there will be the first female president. I think the United States of America maintains its hegemony in such a way that by 2050, there will be universal talk of a new world order. Obviously, the White House ballroom will be celebrating its 10th anniversary that year, and it will be lively and energetic like a general after 3 months of virtual reality therapy. Story 31. Hard to say. Possibly an inevitable disintegration into regional nations, followed by violent wars and possible nuclear exchanges. The United States has lost its way, and the leaders are not interested in fixing it. Story 32. Stop with doomsday, over-the-top negativity. Think with logic, not emotion. This country has been through much worse. Make America great again is a ruse. The United States of America has always been great. Perfect? No. But able to change as needed and ultimately making progress. In 50 years, we will be the same, good at some things, poor at other things, and learning. Technology will continue to drive the economy and comfort, so it will be vital that we restore research and development, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, and incentivize innovation. Story 33. I am optimistic. I believe the United States' future is looking bright. We have problems, but we still seem to be able to address them and overcome. Story 34. Unless we overthrow the billionaire ruling class soon, there will no longer be a human race in 50 years. Story 35. We will have learned from the dark decades from 2025 to 2045 and rebuilt our country based on peace and goodwill. We value all opinions, and all decisions are based on what is best for the residents of the country and the world. However, the entire country will be like Escape from New York, and we will all be scared of the Duke. Story 36. There probably will not be a United States 50 years from now. It was heading for a wall long before a certain unnamed orange president slammed his swollen ankle on the gas pedal. Story 37. Not good. Quite possibly, the United States will impose tariffs on China and India since their economies keep growing. With how things are going with the iPad generation, I predict that American literacy will continue to decline. High school students on the verge of graduation are entering life with the reading comprehension of an elementary school child. People think it is funny, but you have to realize these kids will vote and run businesses. Story 38. 50 years ago, in 1975, no one could have predicted half the issues we are facing today. Any guesses either went too bleak or merely dressed up the issues of the 1970s in futuristic clothing. One thing that is definitely coming is extreme heat and extreme weather. We can make some guesses based on that, and we can make some extrapolations given that the United States right now feels uncomfortably similar to Germany circa 1933, with the worst still ahead of us. The concentration camps are already being built, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement has already received funding to become the largest law enforcement organization in the country. But people in Germany in 1933 could not even begin to imagine Germany in 1983. For all we know, everything that seems important now will be dwarfed by technological advances. It seems as though the United States is shooting its own future in the foot, but whatever our guesses are, they are surely mostly wrong. Just the fact that all the guesses are heavily rooted in Trump is ruining everything tells me that we are projecting 2025 problems onto 2075. One other thing I am sure of, Donald Trump will be long gone by then, and the world will be dealing with other problems. Story 39. You are all crazy. Experts cannot predict what is going to happen even 5 years ahead. Nobody saw Donald Trump coming. Nobody saw the September 11th attacks happening until weeks before. The only semi-predictable thing is that the United States will make up much less of the world economy if nothing significant happens with artificial intelligence or geopolitics to change this. Regarding the idea of the United States empire falling apart, as some have suggested, most empires had many close calls before they fell, so it is really hard to know if this is a bad period or the beginning of the end. Story 40. Pseudo-fascism. Claiming freedom and Congress still in place, but realistically the empire of the West. New Rome. Seriously though, no one has any idea. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.